Alright, hello and welcome to ETeeski Tutorials. You are watching the Ultimate Game Dev Tutorial series, and in this episode we're going to be introduced to Blender, which is a 3D modeling program for creating 3D models such as characters or, just objects in our game like robots or, maybe since in our game we're creating a high school, you can create desks and lockers and a drinking fountain or a staircase or, basically any kind of 3D shape, whether that's a character or an object. We're going to be creating them in Blender. So one thing I want to quickly explain, depending on who you are, you might have come from the previous tutorials where I was teaching how to create games in Unity, or otherwise known as Unity3D, and how to code and script a video game. Or you might be a new viewer that just skipped right to the art part. Like you don't really care about, programming a video game. You really care more about the artwork side of it. And that's awesome too, because video games, when building video games, they are really separated into two main categories. You have your programming and you have your artwork. So these tutorials from this point, not this point forth, because we're going to be jumping back and forth between artwork and programming. But at least on the artwork side, some of the chapters I'll have them clearly labeled, which ones are artwork and which ones are programming. But on these artwork chapters, we're going to be using Blender and GIMP to create our learn how to talk. Our artwork. Why is that hard to say? I don't know. But anyways, okay, so this is Blender. It's free. This is the full version. Unlike Unity, how there's a basic free version and then there's a pro version that you pay for, Blender is just free. I don't know how they pulled it off. I'm sure there's some backstory as to why it's free, but it is crazy that this amazing piece of software is free. I have seen some people create some really amazing things with Blender, and I've even heard of professional 3D video game artists who prefer Blender over very expensive programs such as Maya or 3ds Max, or I don't know, there's a bunch of other ones. But yeah, Blender is just really, really awesome, and it's available on PC and Mac. And the website you go to get Blender is blender.org. And as you can see, there's like a little donkey thing in the background. You can create amazing things in Blender, such as that. And if you just search things made with Blender or Blender 3D artwork, you can find some examples of some really amazing things made in Blender. I've seen short movies on YouTube made in Blender that are very comparable to Pixar movies. So not only is Blender great for creating 3D artwork for video games, but it's also great for creating rendered animations and movies and still images. And that would be more along the lines of something like Pixar, or, when you go to the movie theater and you see, an animated 3D movie, that's something that is rendered beforehand and then played back. Whereas in our case, we're going to be creating artwork that's rendered in real time. So basically that means that in video games, we have to be more optimized. We have to make our files a little bit more smaller. They can still look really amazing. And we can make them look really, really good. But we just have to make sure that they are designed in such a way that they can be rendered in real time. Basically, they're going to be rendered as we go in our video game, because video games aren't like a movie. It's not like, where only one thing is going to happen, like in a movie. Like the movie's going to play the exact same way every time, whereas a video game, it's going to be different every single time, and it's a 3D world that you can explore and move around in. So it just has to be faster for video games. So yeah, just to sum up what I just said about the difference between pre-rendered and rendered in real time, I just wanted to talk about that because a lot of the tutorials and information you're going to find out there on Blender is geared towards rendered or pre-rendered things such as images and movies. Whereas in this tutorial series, we're going to be focusing more on video games. So I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so yep, you can download Blender at blender.org/download, and it is available for PC and Macs and apparently Linux, which maybe, is that true? I don't know. But we're not using Linux in this tutorial series. I guess you could if you want, if you're using just Blender, but we're using Unity3D, which is only on PC and Mac. Alright, and then one other thing about this tutorial series and how I'm going to be using Blender is that I'm going to really try to focus on the technical side and really focus on teaching you how things are really working in, geared towards video games, because I don't really know that much about pre-rendering videos. I have honestly never used Blender for that. I've only used Blender for making 3D models for video games. And I'm not the greatest artist when it comes to 3D models or just artwork in general. I'll throw some images up on the screen right now, or some videos on the screen of some artwork that I've created. I've created a mobile iPhone game called Galaxia Interface a few years back. So those are some 3D models and textures that I made before. And then there's a first-person shooter called Robot Zombies. I created all of the models and textures and animations for that. That's another great thing about Blender, is you can create animations very well inside of Blender, and that's really great, and we're going to be learning a little bit about that in this tutorial series. And then my most recent game that I created all of the artwork for is Ant Simulator, and actually all of the artwork that you see in Ant Simulator was actually created in 48 hours. So Blender can actually work pretty fast once you get used to it. It's kind of like riding a bike. It's very strange at first, but once you get a hang of it, it goes really fast, and you just do it without even thinking about it. So yeah, those were some examples of my experience with 3D modeling and creating 3D artwork. So, I'm not the best of the best. And there's certainly other people who make tutorials out there that can teach you a lot more about Blender in addition to these videos. But I really want to just focus on the technical side and talk about, how to create 3D models for video games. Because, well, that's what we're going to be doing in the Ultimate Game Dev tutorial series. We're going to be creating 3D artwork that we're going to bring into the video game that we're creating. There's some other really great resources out there. Off the top of my head, there's Blender Guru. A lot of his stuff is geared more towards pre-rendered stuff, but it's still really, really great information and really high quality tutorials. I'll put a link in the description below to all the different places that I mentioned, but Blender Guru is great. Blender Cookie is also really great. And then if you just search Blender tutorial in YouTube and just search for Blender videos in YouTube, there's lots and lots of videos on Blender. There are the Blender forums on blender.org. There's a Blender subreddit on Reddit. I believe it's just called Blender, or reddit.com/r/Blender, I believe. I'll put a link in the description below to that. So yeah, and then one last thing before I start actually talking about how to use this software is I just want to talk about the idea of being an artist. And this goes for any type of art, whether you're a painter, or if you sketch drawings, or if you model things with clay, or if you're a filmographer and you make movies. This applies to any type of artwork. And Blender is the exact same way. And what I want to say is that I can show you the tools, or at least I can show you the tools that I use when I create artwork, and I can try to tell you my thought process of how I create these things, but do not limit yourself to just what I teach you in these videos. I really want to encourage you to really go out and explore and find out what other Blender artists are doing and see what you can learn from them. And then, aside from that, aside from just gathering information from everywhere that you can find from these tutorials and other tutorials, experiment around on your own. You're going to find your own techniques that work best for you. And, you might find one technique that, just really makes sense to you, and you can use that one technique to create thousands of different things. And especially when it comes to artwork, you have a lot more freedom than, say, video game programming or writing code. Things have to be a little bit more exact when you're writing code. But when it comes to something such as 3D modeling, I mean, first you got to learn the basics, you got to learn how to use the tools. But from there, you eventually will get to a point where you just have a lot of freedom. Once you get past the basics, you're just going to have so much freedom, and there's really no right or wrong anymore. It's all about creativity and practice. Practice, practice, practice. Just like any other art form. It's like kind of like, I can show you a paintbrush and I can tell you how to use the paintbrush to put paint on your canvas, but, that's not going to teach you how to be an artist. To be an artist, you just have to keep on practicing and find your own creative way. And, you can try to learn from other artists, but a lot of it has to come from you. So yeah, I guess I'm going to leave you at that and just say, yeah, just explore and practice, and just look at these tutorials as a starting point, and also kind of just technical tutorials on how to bring your 3D models into video games. Okay, so enough of me talking so abstractly. Yeah, let's just jump into these tutorial series, or into this tutorial, and start talking about how Blender works. Okay, so one thing I want to say about Blender is that it can be very intimidating at first. As you can see, it's pretty complicated looking, right? I mean, this is, for the most part, what Blender is going to look like when you first open it up. And it might look a little bit different depending on what version of Blender you're using, but for the most part, it should look like this. And, besides the fact of it just looking intimidating with just all of these buttons and windows, like, what do all of these things do? And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know what even half of this stuff does. I'm just going to show you the things in here that I use personally to create the artwork that I have created in the past. And, that will just be a good starting point. And then, if you want to become a professional artist after that, you can expand your knowledge from there. But anyways, besides the fact that there's just so many buttons and it's really intimidating, and there's just so many, things to figure out what all of these different things do, there's also keyboard shortcuts, which makes things even more intimidating. So you might think, oh, there's a couple of keyboard shortcuts. I'm used to keyboard shortcuts. I use computers. I know that Control C is copy, and Control V is paste, and Control A is select all. Like, yeah, I know, and Control Alt Delete is, exit out of a program. Like, yeah, you probably know a couple of keyboard shortcuts, and that is awesome to know keyboard shortcuts. It makes your work go a whole lot faster, and instead of remembering where the buttons are on your computer, you can remember where the physical buttons are in front of you on your keyboard. But Blender has a lot of keyboard shortcuts. And they are pretty much, they're not even just optional, they're pretty much, you need the keyboard shortcuts. Like, there's really no option when it comes to keyboard shortcuts in Blender. You have to learn them, and it's like riding a bike. You just practice, 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 and, at first you're going to keep on referencing and, looking at the list of keyboard shortcuts. And I'll drag this over here so you can see, I actually have a little notepad file with a bunch of keyboard shortcuts. That's a lot of keyboard shortcuts, right? And you might think, wow, Blender has a lot of keyboard shortcuts. Well, everything in front of you right there, that's not even all of them. That is just the ones that I use. But that being said, I know this sounds really scary, but it's not as hard as it looks. You see all of these keyboard shortcuts, and these are all keyboard shortcuts that I have memorized. And if I can do it, you can do it too. It's just kind of like, I just keep on using this analogy. It's like riding a bike. You keep on practicing it, and eventually you won't even think about it anymore. And one great thing about these keyboard shortcuts is that they are planned out very well, and they're actually pretty easy to remember. And a lot of the letters really, they have word association with them to make them really easy to remember. Like G, you can remember by the word grab, and that's the move tool. R is rotate, S is scale, B is box select, and there's just a lot of ones like that you'll just memorize because of word association. And in this tutorial, we're not going to learn all of these keyboard shortcuts. This is probably the majority of the keyboard shortcuts that we're going to learn in this tutorial series, and I'll write in the description below the keyboard shortcuts that we use in this video, and then I'll probably also have a link in the description below to a page where I write all of the keyboard shortcuts, and I'll try to keep it very organized for you. And another great thing is that if you just go on Google and you just Google search Blender shortcut key or keyboard shortcut, and then whatever tool you're trying to find, it should for the most part always be within the first or second result of the Google search, because Blender has a really great community, and if you reach out there and ask people questions, and search before you ask, you'll probably find people who have been asking the same questions. So there's a lot of information out there on Blender. So like I said, it might be intimidating at first, but don't let that get you down. Just keep on trying, and it'll click sooner than you think. That you will eventually get a hang of it, and Blender will just feel awesome, and you'll be able to make great things with it. So yeah, so that's keyboard shortcuts. And that being said, with the keyboard shortcuts, I would recommend that you have a full-size keyboard and mouse. So that means that your keyboard should have, all of the standard letters and numbers, and also it should have a numpad on the right-hand side. And then your mouse should have a left click, a right click, and then a middle mouse click slash mouse wheel. And if you have those things, you should be set. And most computers have that. If you have a regular computer, you should have that. If you have a laptop, it might be a little bit tricky. You might want to look into buying, you can just buy a cheap keyboard and mouse, or maybe you can just find one or ask a friend if you can borrow one for the time being, or maybe you can just have it. I don't know. They're pretty easy to come by. And you don't need anything special. It just has to have all the keys. And there are ways around it so that you don't necessarily need those keys, but it's just easier, and I'm going to be teaching you assuming that you have these keys and that you have a mouse with a left click, right click, and middle mouse. So if you're on an Apple computer and you just have the mouse with a single click, you should get a new mouse. I mean, you're going to be really, really lost without it. That's one thing I would highly recommend. I mean, first of all, I'm just not a fan of Apple mice. Honestly, I just think they're horrible. That's just a personal opinion of mine, but that's just a side note. But any PC mouse should work with your Mac. As long as it's USB, you just plug it into your computer, and for the most part, it should be good to go. All right, so I think that is enough prep talk. Let's actually jump into it, and in this tutorial I'm going to specifically tell you some common windows that I use, and you can see that you can resize these windows. Whoops, I didn't click on that in the right place. I meant to click it there. You can resize all of these windows, and then you can rearrange these windows however you want. And if you're coming from the previous tutorials about Unity3D, it's somewhat similar to Unity3D, where you can put windows just about anywhere that you want. The only thing that's different is, well, the way that you move the windows around, and you can't drag the windows outside and make them their own separate window. That's a little bit of a downfall, but that's okay. And let's see, besides the windows, I'm also going to teach you just a couple of very basics about how to navigate your way around, and I'm going to teach you how to save and open a file, and also something called the, I believe it's called the user default file. Let me check. If I go to file, it is called startup file. I don't know why I said the word user. I guess it's just called save startup file. So I'm going to teach you what that is. All right. So let's get started. This is what your Blender should look like when you first open it. And one thing, I guess, let's first talk about the, what is this window even called? I believe it is just called 3D view. Okay, so this is the 3D view window. And this little bar down here and this bar over here is actually attached to the 3D view window. And one way that you can navigate around is with your middle mouse. And actually one thing I need to do is I need to go down here and click on Start Display so that there you can see a little overlay thing that should for the most part tell you what buttons I'm pressing, because that's a very important when it comes to Blender. So first of all, the easiest way to move your view around, and we're going to talk more about navigating your view around later, but if you just click your middle mouse and then while holding down your middle mouse button, you just drag. And when I say middle mouse, I mean you click on the mouse wheel, and instead of scrolling up or scrolling down, you push the entire mouse wheel down and it makes a little click. Most computer mice wheels have that, at least modern ones almost always do. So in case you didn't know that, it's actually a very useful thing when it comes to computers. So anyways, click your middle mouse button down and you can drag it and you can orbit your camera around in a circle. So that's the first thing. Now, the next thing you might be thinking is, well, how do I select stuff? Like, let's say I want to select this box. You might think, well, you just left click on it, right? Whoops, what's that? I keep on clicking around in this little, I don't even know what that thing looks like, but it's called the 3D cursor. So it's a little bit backwards. You would think that left click is to select things, but really left click is just move around your 3D cursor. And what your 3D cursor is, you know, and we'll talk more about this as we go, the 3D cursor is basically when you create a new thing, such as a sphere or a ball or a cube or any kind of 3D shape, or and you know, other things that you can add into your game. When you create something new, it's going to be created at your 3D cursor. And as you can see, when I orbit around, my 3D cursor is in 3D space when I'm moving around. So how do you select things? Well, it's actually really simple. Right click. So it's a little bit strange and it might throw you off at first. Like, in every other program I've ever used, left click is always select, but in Blender, it's right click. And that's just something you're going to get used to, and you know, it won't take you very long. That's one thing you'll get used to pretty soon, and that was one thing I accidentally did. If you hold down right click and drag, you can move stuff around. And then, you know, as you can see, it is stuck to my mouse cursor. I'm not holding any buttons down, and I can left click to place it right there. And I'm going to press Control Z to show you another thing. If I drag and drop it, and then I hit right click is also kind of like cancel. So, you know, if I'm in the middle of accomplishing a task or in the middle of using a tool, I can hit right click to cancel, such as moving an object around. And once again, we're going to talk more about that later. Okay, now let's talk about some different windows and windows that you might use. I'm going to start off with the 3D view, and I'm going to talk about the toolbar and the preference bar. And to open those up or close them, it's T and N. So those are two bars that you can open and close, and those are a part of your 3D view. The toolbar is very common, and over here we have a bunch of tabs. We can go to our Create tab, and here's a bunch of 3D shapes we can create. Like, let's say we want to create a sphere, and we created a sphere at our 3D cursor. And then, you know, we have tools over here. What are those? I actually don't even ever use those. There's a lot of stuff in here that I don't use. I don't use that. I don't think I've ever used that. And I don't think I've ever used that. So I've only ever used tools and create, and also if I'm in edit mode, there's a couple other tools that are there that I sometimes use. But yeah, that's your toolbar. There's just a bunch of tools for your 3D view that you can use. And if you want to get that out of your way, like you're not using any tools, you can just hit T and it gets it out of the way, and now you have more room to see what's going on over here. And same with our preference window over here. Whoops, I meant to put my mouse cursor over this. That's another thing. When you, like, for example, if your mouse cursor is over the 3D view, when I use the mouse wheel, I zoom in and out. But if my mouse cursor is over the preference bar and I use the scroll wheel, I will scroll up and down on the preference bar. And if I want to get rid of the preference bar, I just hit N. And then if I want to get it back, I can hit N again, or I can hit that little, whoops, that little plus right there. Same with the toolbar. There's a little plus symbol that seems pretty hidden, but I can get to it by clicking that, and then I can hit T to get rid of it. So yeah, that's the toolbar and the preference. And then the preference, there's a lot of stuff in here. A lot of stuff like, you can change the location and rotation of objects. You can change the scale. You can change a lot of different stuff. What's this? I've never used that before. Oh, cool. I didn't know you could use that. That's pretty useful. You can change the camera angle of your 3D view. I actually didn't even know that. There is, you can change the location of the 3D cursor. And as you can see, I'm, in this case, I'm just clicking on there and then dragging left and right to adjust that value. So here on the x-axis, which is that right there, it's kind of like a number line that goes left and right. And the y-axis is forward and backwards. It's like a number line that goes in that direction. So that direction is positive, that direction is negative. So as you can see, when I drag this number, right now it's at 2.6. If I drag it up, it goes that way. If I drag it down, it goes that way. If I want to make it go up and down, I go on the z-axis, which as you can see, actually, unfortunately, let's see, if I hit T, maybe that'll get out of my way. Oh, I don't know, it's kind of covered up. But as you can see, there's a line here. Actually, you probably can't see that at all because there's stuff in the way, but there's a blue line here labeled Z, a green line here labeled Y, and a red line here labeled X. So as you can see on our move tool over here, Z is up and down because it's blue, Y is forward and back because it's green, and red is left and right because it is X. So X, Y, and Z. And just on a side note, if you're coming from the Unity tutorials where I'm teaching you how to create games in Unity, you probably remember that Y is up and down and Z is forward and backwards, and you might be confused about that. Well, Blender's just different. And when it comes to 3D math, I guess Z is more commonly used as up and down. And in Blender, they like to have Z be up and down. So that's just one thing to remember, and that's one thing that you'll just get used to. But when you import your models from Blender to Unity, Unity is going to automatically detect it and still make sure that everything is upright and oriented the right way, and it's going to automatically flip Z and Y to just match the way that they're supposed to be. So that's just a side note, just to remember. So let's see, what did I want to talk about next? I explained X, Y, and Z in Blender, and then our preference windows. Anyways, one more thing I should say about, dragging these values like that. So when I say I want to change the location of my 3D cursor and I want to move it forward, I can drag it. Or if I know exactly where I want it to be, I can just click once and then I can type it in, like say 10, and then hit enter. And then there we go. It moved to where I wanted it to go. And then I guess I can also click these little arrows to do little increments like that. I don't do that very often though. Or alternatively, you can just click where you want it to be, and that works too. And yeah, so in the preference window, there's just a lot of options that you have available to you. And we'll be referencing some stuff in here from time to time. And it's hard for me to explain the category of all the things that are in here, but you'll just get used to all of the things that are in here. And yeah. And one other thing I want to talk about is your middle mouse drag scroll. I don't know if that's the official term for what it's called, but if I take my middle mouse and I click it down and then I pull up or down, you can see I can drag this And that is very useful because sometimes, I don't know, sometimes you might use your mouse wheel, or sometimes you might want to just click it and drag it. So that's useful in that instance. But one other thing I want to talk about when it comes to that drag like that is that let's say that our 3D view window is scrunched down. So let me, or I don't know, I'll put it like that, and I'll just move that over there like that. You know, let's just say that we wanted that window really big and this window's really small. And this can happen all over in Blender. But the trouble is that you can see there's a bunch of buttons right there. So if I drag that over right there, you can see all of these buttons, which are tools available to us for the 3D view. If I drag that over, you can see that we've lost a lot of those buttons. And a lot of times, like if you're watching tutorials, you might see them use a button in a window that you just don't see on your computer. Or maybe you're using a smaller screen, or maybe you just have your windows rearranged in a different way. Now, this doesn't mean that we can no longer get to those tools. All we need to do is use our middle mouse scroll, just like we did up here, but we're going to do it right here. So if I just click middle mouse, you can see I can drag it left and right, and I can get to all of those tools that were covered up. So that's just one really nice trick, just to, you know, let you get to your different tools in case you can't see them, or just in case, you know, you have your window scrunched down in a really small way. So up here, it's the exact same thing. If I want to get to all those buttons, and my window's too small to see all of them, I can just click the middle mouse and just drag it to find which ones I want. And I can also, let's see, I guess, I don't know why that symbol shows up when that's not something that you can drag. So that's another confusing thing. If you're trying to rearrange your windows, sometimes you might think like, oh, I want to make this smaller. Wait, why isn't it moving? Well, you actually got to drag it from down here. So I'm not really sure why. I mean, I guess it's because this window actually starts up here, goes over here, and actually ends down here, because all of these tools in this bar are actually part of the 3D view. So that's just one thing to note, is that, you know, sometimes when you resize things, you might click somewhere and think that's what you want. Oh, I guess you can get rid of that if you want. Or you can click and drag it like that. So that's how to resize your windows. And you can also do that with this. So I can make that bigger or smaller, or I can just press N to get it away. No, I guess I would rather have it more like that. So yeah, that is how to resize stuff. And there's like a lot of different things that you can resize. I'm actually curious, if I get rid of that, can I pull it back? Oh, I see. There's a little plus symbol right there that you can click on to get it back. So if you accidentally drag that away and you want your tools back, there's a little plus symbol right there. That's good to know. All right. Now, let's say you want to change these windows around. You want different windows in different places because, you know, maybe you're not using any of this stuff over here, or, you know, maybe you just want access to different windows. There's a couple of different ways that you can do that. First of all, you can change which windows you're looking at, or what type of windows they are, by this little button, and I believe it's, well, I guess depending on the window, it's either going to be in the top left-hand corner or the bottom left-hand corner. So over here, it's this. I guess the way you can tell it is it has that little up triangle and down triangle next to it, and then a little symbol. But there's one, and this is how you change what type of window it is. So let's say that instead of the 3D view, I wanted to view the UV map. So I click on that, and as you can see, here's all the different window types, and then UV image editor. There we go. I changed the window type, and this is our UV editor. So that's something different that we're going to talk about later. And then I can change it back to 3D view if I want. But let's say that I wanted to see the UV editor and the 3D view at the same time. Like I want to split this in half and have half of it be the 3D view and half of it be the UV editor. Well, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go up to this little thing in the corner. And as you can see, every window has it, I believe, in the top right-hand corner and the bottom left-hand corner. I believe you can probably use either one, but it's just those little lines in the corner. So you put your mouse on it, and then you drag over. like that. So you drag into the window to split it, and then it's going to duplicate that window. So now we have two of the same window, and we can move them independently, or we can change this to a different type of window. And let's say I want to change it to the UV editor window. Well, there we go. Now I have the UV editor and our 3D view. And this is something that I do all the time because I think that it's really useful. And yeah, so that is how to create new windows. And like, let's say I want to split this one in half. I just drag and drop it from there. So so to create a new window, you go to the little corner thing and then you drag into the window, just like that. But as you can see, I just created a bunch of windows and I probably want to get rid of some of these. So how do I do that? Well, this is something that's a little bit tricky and might take a little bit of practice and might be a little bit hard for me to explain. But what you do is basically you want one window to take over another window. That's how you get rid of windows that you don't want. So let's say I want this window to take over this window because this is the window I want to get rid of, and I want to make this window bigger so that I have more room to see what's in here. So what I do is I go to the window that I want to take over the other window. So this is the window that I want to be bigger. So I'm going to take this window and I'm going to go up to the corner closest to the window that I want to take over. In this case, it's the top right. I go to this, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in a swift motion, I'm going to drag this corner into this window, and you'll see, bam, like that. So it's kind of hard to see, but do you see that faint outline of an arrow pointing into that window, and then this window got a little bit darker? Now I'm holding down the left mouse right now, and then when I let go of it, as you can see, it took over the window. So let's try that again. Let's make this window take over this window. So I'm going to go to the corner that's closest to the window that I want to take over. So in this case, it's the bottom left-hand corner. And so I want this window, and remember that this window, this bar down here is affecting this window. It's inside of that window. So that little bottom left-hand corner is a part of this window, and that's the window that I want to take over this window. So I go to this little bottom left-hand corner and I drag in. Whoops. Oh, whoops. I messed up. I went in the wrong direction. I created a new window. So let's try that again. Sometimes that happens. That's where it takes a little bit of practice. So I'm going to go to this bottom left-hand corner and I'm going to drag it into that window. So let's go. So drag in. I messed up again. All right, let's try this again. I'm going to have this window take over this window. Click on that corner and drag in. There we go. All right, so I'm going to take this corner, the window I want to take over this window, and drag into the window that I want to take over. So let's do it again. Bam. All right, got it. There we go. So it takes a little bit of practice. So let's try that one more time. I want this window to take over this window. So I'm going to take this corner and I'm going to drag into the window that I want to take over. So bam. I messed up again. Let's try that. Let's drag in. All right, drag in. There we go. And let's do one more time. Let's make the 3D view take over the UV map editor. So drag in. There we go. We got it. So that is how to create and get rid of windows. And one thing that you can also do is you can save your window layouts, and you can also access window layouts that are pre-made for us. So why don't we take a look at some of the pre-made window layouts. This one is default, and this is the one that you'll probably see a lot of people use. And the two main ones that I use are default and animation. For the most part, those are the only ones that I'm going to use in this tutorial series, or that I ever really use myself at all. So let's take a look at the animation window and see what that looks like. As you can see, a lot of things have been rearranged, and we have new windows that we haven't seen before. And this is the, let's see what it's called. It is the dope sheet. And then this is the, I believe it's called the curve editor. Let's see, oh, graph editor. And then down here is the timeline. So this is a window that we're going to be using in future tutorials to create animations, or in other words, being able to make our character move and, say like if we want to create a running sequence for our player character, we're going to create animations for that. So let's go back to default. So I'm going to go to default, and there we go. We're back to default. So here's our default window, and now I want to show you how to create your own presets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this window just a little bit towards what I like to have it as. And what I like to do is get rid of the timeline down here, because the timeline is used for animations, and when you're just doing regular 3D modeling, you don't really need to worry about animations. Like, we'll worry about that later. And if I want to edit animations, I just click up there and I go to animation. That's what I like to do when I'm doing animations. But here's our default. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the 3D view take over the timeline. So take our corner and drag into our timeline. And then there. I took over the timeline, and now the timeline is out of my way. And now I have more room to look at what I am editing in my 3D view. And if I want to save that, or if I want to create a new layout, well, I believe this is going to automatically save when we save our .blend file, or when we save just what we're working on. In this case, it's called a .blend file. Like if you're working on a like an image, or let's say you're working on a Word document, it would be .doc or I believe it's called RTS or RTF. Or if you have a audio file, .mp3. So you know how there's just a bunch of different file types, and they're always dot something to determine what type of file it is. Well, in Blender, when we save what we're working on, it's going to save inside of something called .blend. And I'm going to show you that a little bit more in a little bit. And just one thing to note is that your layouts are going to save in your .blend file. And then if you want to create more layouts, like let's say I want to create my own layout, I'm just going to hit this little plus sign next to our little window layout doohickey thingamajig over here. So you can select all the default ones there. Whoops, I want to go back to default, and let's add a new one. So I click the plus symbol right there, and as you can see, it says default 001. And we can click on that, just one click without moving the mouse, and then we can rename it, and we can call this, I don't know, my layout. Let's call it that. So hit enter, and now we have a new layout called my layout. And I'm going to create a new window, and I'm just going to change this around just so that we can totally see that this is a unique layout that we've created. So this is the way I like to have my layout a lot of the times, and I'll just resize this depending on what I'm working on, whether I'm working on the UV mapping or the 3D modeling, and I just like to keep it like that. So now you can see my layout is now in this list. So I can go back to default, and as you can see, default was where we left it, where we got rid of the timeline. And now when I go to my layout, there's the UV map like I added for my layouts. And then, let's say later on I create a layout that I just really don't care about anymore, and I want to get rid of it. Well, you just hit this little X, and it got rid of it. And, well, it just went to the motion tracking layouts, because I guess it just went up to the next one on the list, but then we can go back up to default, and now we're back to the default layout. And I'm going to come back to these layouts and talk about them a little bit more in just a second. So that pretty much summarizes that. I guess what is the next thing I should talk about? Well, I guess while we're talking about windows and layouts, let's talk about some common windows and basically what they do and what they're used for. One that you probably already know that I've been referencing a lot so far is the 3D view. And as you can see, go here, 3D view, so that's what we're on right here. So this is our 3D view window, and this is used for editing our 3D shapes and navigating around and looking at stuff. So chances are you're always going to have this one open because we want to look at what we're creating. So that's why we have the 3D view. So that's the 3D view. The other one I was talking about earlier is the UV editor. So if I just click there and I go to UV image or UV/image editor, here's our UV map editor is what I like to call it. I always call it a UV map. And we'll talk more about this later, but basically this is how we take a 2D image and then cut it apart and then put it onto our 3D shape. So if I go back to our 3D view, you can see that all of these shapes, or these two shapes that I've created, they're just gray and they're boring and there's no color, or there's no images on them. There's no texture to them. Like, let's say that I want to make this be like a wood material. That's what I need a texture for. But if I just take a picture of a piece of wood and try to put it on here, the 3D shape is not going to know where to put that image of the wood. And that is why we need the UV editor. This is what we are going to use to create a map that's going to cut apart that 2D image and put it on the 3D image. And we're going to talk more about that later in, I don't know how many tutorials from now. We're just going to talk about this later. Let's just leave it at that. All right, so that is that. What are some other windows that I commonly use? Well, let's talk about this window over here, what is it even called? Oh, properties. This is our properties window. So I guess if I press N, and I guess I'll go back to the 3D view to make it a little bit more simple. All right, so in our 3D view, remember when I press N, we have the properties bar over here. Well, we have another properties window over here. At least I think this is called the properties bar. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. I'm not actually 100% sure on that. But anyways, this is a whole bunch of settings for whatever you have selected. And this is a whole bunch more settings for what you have selected. And as you can see, we also have a bunch of tabs with even more settings in them. So as you can see, there are tons and tons and tons of tools available to us, and we're only going to be scratching the surface in this tutorial series. I'm just going to show you the tools that I like to use to create 3D models for video games. So yeah, I guess just to sum up the properties window, what I have opened right here. And as you can see, I can change this window to say 3D view. This can be another 3D view. And I guess the button's down there now. Or I can change it back to user preferences. I can change it to the timeline if I want, which doesn't really make sense when it's like a tall vertical screen like that. Or I can change it back to what I usually like to have right there, which is properties. So yeah, I guess just to sum up the properties bar, which is a part of the 3D view, and the properties window, which is its own window, both of these are just extra settings for whatever you have selected. Excuse me. And then up here, we have the, what is it even called? I don't even know what it's called. Let's see. There's that symbol. There we go. Outliner. I wouldn't have called it the outliner. I would have called this the list of our stuff. Or if you're coming from the Unity tutorials, this is much like the hierarchy. Just a list of everything that we have in our 3D view. So as you can see, if I select the sphere, over here, it has selected the sphere. If I select the cube, over here, it has selected the cube. And then we can select the, I don't know, I guess I have to just left click on it in here. Okay, so I guess you left click when you're inside of the outliner window, but you right click when you're in the 3D view. I guess that's just something to get used to. Usually I just click on the things that I want with right click, and I just keep it simple that way. But yeah, this is basically just a list of everything that we have. And then you can have things under your list, and you can combine things. And I believe you can turn them on and off, whether or not you can see them. So if we want to get this cube out of our way, we can click on that little eye and get rid of it. So yeah, that's basically, to sum that up, that's just a list of all of our stuff. And whatever you have selected over here is going to select the same thing over there, and vice versa. So if I select that point light, it has selected it over there. All right, so that is the outliner. And let's see, those are pretty much the three main things that I use. And the biggest thing that I use is the 3D view, because if I go down here where it says object mode, I gotta select something, like let's select this cube. If I go to object mode and I click on this, as you can see, there's a bunch more modes. And one of the most common ones that we're going to talk about probably in the next episode is the edit mode. And this is how to edit the shape of something. Like, let's just say I want to change the shape of this cube to be more like that. I can go back to object mode now, And now I can select between different objects. If I want to edit this cube, I can go to edit mode, and let's just say I want to move that one little point. I want to move it up like that, and then go back to object mode. And as you can see, there's a bunch of other modes such as sculpt mode, and sculpt mode lets you like paint stuff. And if I press T, you can see we have a bunch of tools that are available to us, and you can sculpt things. So that's something that's fun to play around with. And then we also have a vertex paint mode, weight paint, texture paint. We're just probably only going to be using weight paint. We might use a little bit of sculpt mode, but the three main that we're going to be using, actually I'll just say the two main that we're going to be using is object mode, edit mode, and we might touch on sculpt mode and weight paint maybe. But you can also explore those modes and find out what they do. And then one trick, like it's kind of slow to go back and forth between clicking on this window and clicking edit mode and clicking object mode. So one thing we can do to actually move that even faster is we can just hit tab, and it will switch between object mode and edit mode. Or more specifically, it's going to switch between the last two modes that we had selected. So if I select weight paint, and then I hit tab, the last one I had opened was edit mode and weight paint mode. So if I keep on hitting tab, it's going to switch between the last two modes that I had open. And if it's object mode and edit mode, that's probably the most common that you're going to switch between, is editing the shape of your stuff and just selecting different objects. So that's just something I wanted to point out, that the 3D view not only is just a 3D view, but it has a lot of other uses as well, and you can do a lot of stuff from the different windows. And depending on what type of object you have selected, there's also like a pose mode, and probably I think it's just called pose mode. Yeah, just a pose mode, and there might be some other ones as well. And yeah, there's that. And then there's also animation. And the only difference with animation really is the timeline, the graph editor, and the dope sheet. So these are just here by default, and whenever I'm creating animations, I just leave these as they are. And I'll get back into what all of these do later, because all three of these kind of go hand in hand. As you can see, when I click around, this green line also moves on these two windows as well. And yeah, they just all three of them have different purposes. So yeah, that's just, I count the default layout of animation, which default is when you go up here and you click animation. I just leave that as it is, and I just count that all as one. But I'm going to go back to default as we were before. So yeah, that was a quick summary of some of the windows that I use. I think those are actually all of the windows that I use. But yeah, so yeah, we learned how to rearrange windows. We learned how to save layouts. We learned how to go to default layouts. And yeah, so now let's learn about saving and opening files. So let's say that I've created all of this, and I want to leave it the way it is. Like, I want to save this to either import into my video game, or I just want to save this so that I can work on it later. There's two different ways that I can do this. Well, actually more like three different ways. The first way, and probably the most obvious way, is you go to File and Save. And I'm going to click on that. And I believe it's going to take me a second because it's got to take a look at my hard drives. And here is the save file. So let's go up and let's say, where do we want to save this? I want to save it inside of the folder Indoctrination. So I find the folder, and I can click this little up arrow to go up a level in my folder. I can also go over here to click on my different drives. For now, I'm on the F drive, but chances are on your computer, you're probably going to be using the C drive, or maybe the E drive if you have two hard drives on your computer. But basically, that's just what drive you want to save on. So wherever you want to save your files, and if you don't know, chances are it's probably the C drive. Okay, so that's the drive, and then you can select what folders you want to go in. Here's like recent places you've been. And then there's probably a few other settings, but I don't really usually ever use any of those. I always just use click on the drive, click on the folder, and then I go up here and I name it what I want. And you want to leave that dot blend there, and you only want to change what's behind that dot blend. So if I select that and I delete it, as you can see, I have dot or period blend. And then behind the period, so I'm going to press left arrow key until I get all the way to the beginning. And I'm just going to save this what I want. And I'm just going to call this, oh, I don't know, example Blender file. I can name it whatever I want. So I'm going to hit enter. So I hit enter to enter what I just typed. And I believe if I hit enter again, there we go, it just saved. So that's one way to save what we're working on. And then, let's say, I make a change, or just every once in a while, it's just a good practice to save all the time. And the quickest way to save is just to press Control S. And I believe that's Command S if you're on a Mac. So basically with all these keyboard shortcuts, I believe they're all the same on a Mac and a PC, except Command and Control are the two keys that go hand in hand between PC and Mac. So Control if you're on a PC, Command if you're on a Mac. I believe. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. But anyways, so if I press Control S, it's going to say save over. Well, yeah, that's the file I want to save over because I made changes to it. So I'm just going to click there, and that's the file that I saved over. But now let's say that I want to, I do this and I do this and, I scale this up really big. And, I make those changes, but I'm like, all right, I'm not sure if I want to keep those changes. I made these changes, they're pretty radical changes, and I might want to go back to the way it was before. I'm just not totally sure. Well, you can do save as. And to do that, you either go to File, Save As, or you can hit the shortcut key, which is Control-Shift-S. And as you can see, we get the exact same window again. And as you can see, this is red, which means that we already have a file of the same name. So it's telling us, it's highlighting that in red because it's like, you need to change this to a different name. So why don't we change it to a different name? I'm just going to change it to example blender file 2.blend. I'm going to hit enter, and then it went back to gray. So it's saying, okay, that is a good name. You can save it as that. And I can either hit enter again, or I can click on Save as Blender File, and it will save. So there we go. We have saved what we were working on. And, oops, somebody's calling me on my phone. Let me ignore that. Sorry about that. And if we want to, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Anyways, what I was going to say is when you save your files, when you save your .blend file, remember that whatever changes you make to your layouts is going to save in your .blend file. So if we create a new layout called, my layout, and then whatever you want to name it, that's going to save in your .blend file. So let's save that. And now, now that we did that, let's learn how to open a file. So right now we have opened, as you can see up here, like there is the file path on the F drive, in the folder Quadzilla files, game development, and Botchination, example blender file 2.blend. That's what we currently have opened. So let's say we want to open up the first example blender file, because let's say we made this change, we saved it, and then we changed our mind. We want to go back, or maybe we just want to open up a different file that we were working on some other time, or you want to open up a file that somebody else has shared with you and sent to you in an email or on a flash drive or something like that. All we do is we can either go to File, Open, and then you can also go to Open Recent, and there's all your recently opened files. So we can either go to File, Open, or we can press Control O. And this looks very similar to saving our file, and actually this looks practically identical, but the only difference is that instead of saying Save Blender File, it says Open Blender File. And it works the exact same way. We can explore what hard drive we think that our file is. Like, for example, if you have a flash drive, it might be on the F drive, Or if you have it saved on a DVD or a CD, it might be in your D drive. Different computers probably have different letters for what drives that you have. In my example, or in my case, it's going to be on my F drive, and I can explore the files and folders until I get to the file that I want. And, let's say I'm up here and I'm like, oh, it's inside of the folder game development, inside of Indoctrination. Oh, there it is. Example Blender file. That's the one I want to open. So I'm going to select it. And then I believe I can either double click it or hit enter or click on open Blender file. So let me double check. I think I can, yeah, I can just double click it. And as you can see, it has opened up our Blender file that we were working on before we scaled this up and made it really big, and before we added my layout inside of that list. So yeah, this is what we were working on before. So yeah, that pretty much summarizes how to save as, and open. So I know this video is really long and I'm going over a lot of things, but one last thing I want to show you, and this is something that you might find very useful, and I personally find very useful, is saving your default user settings, or what is it called? Your startup file. Saving your startup file. So your startup file is basically when you create a new project, or when you create a new, when you go to File, New, and you create something new, technically you're not, just creating something new, you're actually loading your startup file. And Unity has its own, not Unity, Blender has its own startup file. Remember at the beginning of this tutorial when we had a plain old cube and the camera, and I believe it's still over there, yeah, a light, and there was just those three things in there, and there was the default layout. That is the default, like when you first open up Blender, the first time you install it on your computer, that's your first startup file. So let's say that we don't necessarily want all of those things in there, and personally I don't, because whenever I open up that default startup file, whenever I create a new file in Blender, the first thing I always do is delete all three of those things. And in this case, I guess I might as well delete that weird misshapen sphere, and I'm just going to hit the DEL key, or the delete key, and delete. Yeah, okay, delete it. Okay, good. We're good to go. All right. And let's say I want to delete these other things as well, because I never used lights inside of Blender. You can use lights inside of Blender. They're useful for mostly just for rendering images and movies inside of Blender, kind of like Pixar or something like that. Same with the camera. But because that's not what I'm doing, I just want the 3D shape, and that's it, because I'm going to import it into my video game. And the camera and the lighting, that's something that I'm going to do inside of Unity, inside of my game engine. So I'm going to delete these. So I can hold down Shift, right click, now I have them both selected, or I can select them individually, and I just hit the delete key and click on delete, delete. Oh, one thing I noticed is that my keys disappeared. There we go. Let me do that to get the keys back. Hit N to get that out of my way. All right, and let's say that I also want to delete this cube. I just want to start blank. I don't want anything in my way when I first start a project. And one other thing is that, I want my 3D cursor to be in the center, which sometimes it can be kind of hard to get your 3D cursor right in the center, because you can, let's say our 3D cursor's over there. I can go here and be like, oh, I want my 3D cursor to be in the center. So I left click there, and then when I change my view, I'm like, oh, it's not in the center. How do I put it in the center? Well, one nice little trick is we can go to our preferences, or is it preferences, properties? I don't know, whatever. We can go over here and we can go to where it says 3D cursor, or anyways, to press the N key inside of our 3D view. We can go over here to where it says 3D cursor, and we can just go in here and select 0. And then I can either click on the next one and hit 0. But if I want to go faster, I can click on this and I can hit 0, tab, 0, tab, 0, enter. And now my 3D cursor is right in the center. It's at the 0, 0, 0 point, which is at the center of what we're working on. And there we go. Let's say that, this, basically like this, is the way that, actually let's change it. Oh, whatever. Let's say I want it like that. I have everything set up perfectly. This is how I want Blender to always open up whenever I create a new Blender file, or whenever I first open up Blender. This is what I want. I want to save this as my default loading. So I'm going to do that. All I need to do is go to, and one thing I want to mention really quickly is that your layouts are going to save in this as well. So if you get rid of your timeline inside of your default view, like I did, then then it's going to save inside of your startup file. And we can either save our startup file by going to File, Save Startup File, and clicking there, or as you can see right there, it tells us we can also press Control U. And it says, okay, save up startup file. Yeah, save up startup file. And now I'm actually going to exit out of Blender, and it says some changes have not been saved. Are you sure you really want to quit? Yeah, I'm sure I want to quit. I don't want to save those changes. And it has exited out, and there's nothing there anymore. So now when I open up Blender, it's opening up, and let me move this window so it's back in the center so that you can see it. As you can see, we get this little pop-up window, and I can either click on, our recent files that we are working on, or I can just click over here. And as you can see, everything is saved as the default. So that's one nice new thing. Whenever you're creating new files, it's going to save that. And, let's say that I want to, create a cube, and, I move this cube over here, and I'm like, no, that's not what I want. I want to start over. I want to start fresh. I can also go to File, New, and as you can see, it says Reload Startup File. I'm going to click on that, and it reloaded the startup file. So inside of File and Control N, you're probably used to that keyboard shortcut from other programs, but if I go to New, it's labeled as New, and that's basically what it does, but really what it's doing is it's reloading the startup file. So yeah, I know that was a lot of information that I covered, and I hope that it wasn't too boring, because not a lot of this was applicable right now, because, well, we didn't really create anything yet. I just kind of went around and explained a bunch of things. So, maybe this will be a video that you could come back to later. I wouldn't recommend rewatching it, right now. But if none of this made sense, I wouldn't rewatch it right now. I would just move on to the next tutorial. I will try not to jump into this too fast, and I'll re-explain things as we go. But yeah, like I said, Blender can be intimidating at first. So the reason why this video is so long is that I just wanted to give you a good base knowledge and try to generally explain a lot of things that's going on to hopefully make a lot of things feel less intimidating, so that as we're trying to learn more simple things, all of the other things that look complicated aren't necessarily in our way. And it will be a little bit less intimidating as we move from this point forth. So I'm going to end this tutorial, and I'm going to just leave you and just say that one thing that I would encourage you to do after this tutorial is done is to go on YouTube, go on blender.org, go to other places, just Google search around, and look for things made with Blender, and just get an idea of things that people have made with Blender. People have even made video games inside of Blender itself, using only Blender, and that's not something I've ever done myself. I've always preferred using Unity3D, and that's what we're going to do in this tutorial series, or at least if you watch all of the tutorials, not just the art half of these tutorials. I've seen people make Pixar quality short films. I've seen people make just plain old rendered images that can look cartoony, or they can look absolutely photorealistic. Like, it looks like somebody just took a picture of something in real life, and that's just how talented people can get with Blender. So yeah, just go around and search things made with Blender. And also maybe check out some of the other resources for learning Blender. And you can combine knowledge from what they teach you and from what I teach you if you're learning how to create artwork for video games, and maybe watch another tutorial series from someone such as Blender Guru, who teaches you how to create pre-rendered things such as videos and images, and you can take some of his knowledge and apply it towards what I'm trying to teach you in this tutorial series. And, feel free to, at any point jump around to other tutorials made by other people and try to learn from them and follow their tutorials and create things with them, and then maybe come back to this tutorial series and get more information about how to gear that more specifically towards video games. So yeah, there's a lot to explore. I'm going to try to put all the really useful links in the description below to a lot of different really cool resources that I really like. And I'll also try to save the keyboard shortcuts that we used in this video, and also all of the keyboard shortcuts. I'll have a link to a page that will list all of the keyboard shortcuts that we use all throughout this entire tutorial series. So yeah. Sorry for this video being really long. Hopefully the next one will be a little bit shorter and also just simpler, because we got the complicated basic stuff out of the way. Why complicated and basic? We got the base stuff out of the way and basically tried to simplify the complicated looking stuff. That's basically what we did in this tutorial series, right? Or this particular tutorial. Oh well, whatever. It's a long tutorial and this is the end of it. So until my next episode, I will see you later, and keep making games.